we're going to relearn photosynthesis. Now, chlorophyll is a respiratory pigment, meaning its job is to bring in carbon and to kick out oxygen. It's a ventilation system. It's able to do this by absorbing certain wavelengths of light and using that energy to split apart a water molecule. And this process is irreversible, so the hydrogen and the oxygen are separated. The hydrogen is full of electrons, and the oxygen has to be kicked out because it's reactive. It causes acidity, it's toxic. Now that the light energy is a usable form of chemical energy, it can build its cells, it can maintain cell shape, it can transfer these molecules, it can build sugar chains and carbon chains and enzymes and anything else it needs. Now keep in mind that plants grow by building on top of themselves. They don't grow from the bottom up, they grow by packing on new cells around themselves. Now this is going to be important in 1 second when we look at the shape of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a magnesium molecule around a porphyrin ring. And the reason it does this is because when it's absorbing light and it's splitting apart that water molecule, it's generating that energy in radiating spheres. And so you build a molecule around being able to capture and transfer that energy. So you want to build where that radiating sphere is generating. Now this is why in nature everything is fractal. Everything tends to be built around toroidal shapes, cylindrical shapes, heart shapes, and hexagonal shapes. It's building its mass around where it's generating energy. So it's kind of in these radiating spheres, and so you're going to slowly build around that, and then you're going to build around that, and you're going to build around that. And so that's why you have very fractal patterns. Now, if you notice, this is chlorophyll, and this is hemoglobin. So chlorophyll is the equivalent of blood in plants. It's a respiratory pigment that allows that oxygen to go out and that carbon to go in. In blood-based animals, the same thing is going on. You have iron, which is able to absorb certain wavelengths of light, split apart water molecules, and generate energy in radiating spheres. Once again, a healthy blood cell has that same kind of toroidal shape. And the role of blood is equivalent to chlorophyll, except it's bringing out carbon dioxide. It's carrying carbon dioxide to the lungs so that you can exhale. Hemoglobin does photosynthesis in the same way that chlorophyll does, which is it takes water molecules when it's exposed to the right kind of light, and it splits that molecule irreversibly. So you have hydrogen with electrons that you can use as energy, and you have oxygen that you need to kick out, because no organism in the entire world wants oxygen. They're called reactive oxygen species, and they're what cause damage in the cell, oxidative stress, and everything like that. They're abbreviated as reactive oxygen species, but because we can have fun in life, we can call them ROUSs, and you can think of them as these molecular creatures that cause damage in the body, and you have to kick them out. So all the oxygen in you comes from the water that you're splitting when you're exposed to light, and this creates this energy in radiating spheres, and your body has to find a way to get rid of that oxygen. For humans, we pair it with used up carbon, and we breathe it out. So where does the idea that we breathe in what plants breathe out and take oxygen and glucose and burn it as fuel for energy? That idea comes from a French chemist called Lavoisier, who discovered that plants give off oxygen and fire consumes oxygen as fuel, and then he would breathe in all this oxygen and feel lightheaded, and then came to the conclusion that we burn oxygen as fuel as well. Now this guy was 28 when he married a 12-year-old girl, and I, for one, don't really care for the information that comes from someone who doesn't like anyone this side of puberty. And there has been almost no disputes on that information in almost 200 years, despite it having absolutely no basis or even proof. The source of energy has always been light and water when there is a pigment that can absorb that light and cause the water molecule to split apart, generating these spheres of energy. So we learned about hemoglobin and chlorophyll, which play important roles in ventilation, but the most important molecule for energy is melanin. Melanin can absorb the entire range of electromagnetism, and when it's hydrated, when it's with water, it's able to generate this energy. Again, in radiating spheres. Every single plant and animal and organism on the planet uses melanin for energy. An elephant is covered in melanin because melanin is not a UV blocker, it's a radiation absorber so that it can generate energy. Even a tree, the bark and branches are covered in melanin because that's its main source of energy. The chlorophyll is a respiratory pigment, just like blood. It's moving carbon and oxygen so it can help it obtain the molecules it needs to grow and build itself. Glucose is not a source of energy, it's a source of molecules, of the actual building blocks of a cell, of organelles and enzymes and hormones and so on. A beetle covered in melanin, and it uses that energy to help it fly, so that's why most of it is on the outside. Humans have melanin in our brain, in our eyes, in our hair, in our hearts, in our livers, in all the deep tissue of our body. Polar bears are black underneath the white fur because they're exposed to twice as much light, so the melanin tends to gather where you have the most exposure to light. Seeds are covered in melanin, so that's why when you expose it to water and you put it in the soil, it's able to grow because it has the energy it needs to then start building its body. So any cell with a nucleus in the paranuclear space has melanin, and it's generating those spheres of energy that the whole cell will build itself around to capture the electrons in the hydrogen. However, melanin also has a unique property different from chlorophyll and hemoglobin, which is that the process of water dissociation is not irreversible. It can actually reform the water molecule and dissociate it, and it's able to do this so it's constantly generating these spheres of energy. The reason why darker fruit is more antioxidant and why seeds tend to be antioxidant is because they contain a lot more melanin, which means that water molecule is able to be reformed, which takes away that free oxygen because now it's paired with hydrogen again. Melanin is just like iron and magnesium. It's always absorbing light, and when it's hydrated, it's going to be generating those electrons by splitting the water molecule. So when any of those pigments are outside of living organisms, they're still going to be doing those photosynthesis because it's an inherent property. Because we're not getting energy from glucose and oxygen, we're getting energy from light. And so the wavelength of light matters. All of this blue light and artificial lighting causes DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, apoptosis, and cell death, and produces all of these reactive oxygen species. Now, if you believe in the glucose-oxygen combustion theory of energy, all of life would have evolved into grenades. But we're not grenades. We don't have billions of explosions going on in our cells every day. Every organism designs itself around its ability to generate and to absorb light. Every single organism on the planet is producing its own light of biophotons, which again is why we have melanin deep in our brain, our heart, and other tissue. So again, this fractal arrangement is because you build around how you're using light, how you're capturing and absorbing and generating those spheres of energy. So when we go back to blood and you're exercising and you're sweating, that water is being kind of filtered out from your blood and released through the pores of your skin. So your blood temporarily has lost the ability to produce energy and to carry that CO2 out. It's that reason that you're losing water in your blood, that if you're exercising and sweating a lot, you don't really have to urinate as much because most of that water from blood is being sweat out. And the idea of oxygenated blood is a misinterpretation. It is oxygenated because it's no longer able to carry that oxygen out and exhale it, which means you're building up that lactic acid. That lactic acid can only be filtered when you're finally at rest again. The reason very strenuous exercise can lead to these freak deaths, these sudden collapses and heart attacks, is because your blood is dehydrated and your body is full of oxygen it can't get rid of. What they think of as hypoxia, of suffocating, is actually when there's too much oxygen that it destroys the body from within. And the heart can strain itself when it's trying to pump that blood to get you to exhale all that CO2, all that oxygen that you don't want in your body because of those reactive oxygen species. So during exercise, you're not able to get enough pressure to pull out that CO2, and that blood kind of has trouble circulating, and that lactic acid builds up, and so you have to rest or you strain yourself. The same is true for really high elevations. There's not enough pressure for you to be able to breathe in so that you can expand your lungs, draw out CO2, and then breathe it all out. And this is misinterpreted as needing oxygen. What you need is some kind of air so that you can expand your diaphragm, pull out CO2, and breathe out. And as your heart rate increases, it's trying to pump that blood so you can keep moving that CO2 out. Similarly, for babies inside the womb, what the placenta does is it allows for the baby to ventilate its oxygen, and so the mother breathes it out through her lungs. It doesn't matter that the baby's not breathing for itself because you're filtering out that oxygen. That's the only part of breathing that matters. The same principle is why a painted turtle can go under mud or under frozen water for months at a time during the winter. Its brain metabolism stays active, and because of that, it's producing all this extra oxygen and lactic acid, and there's no way to breathe out when you're under mud or frozen underwater. So what the turtle has in its shell and its skeleton is a pH buffer. It neutralizes the acid of oxygen, making it that exhaling is unnecessary. It's also worth noting that the turtle shell is full of melanin and works as like a giant battery or a giant antenna. And that's why turtles like to swim and then lay out in the sun. Now, when your blood is having trouble circulating and your heart's either working too hard or is not working hard enough, and you have all of these immune diseases and you start to accumulate all of this oxidative stress in your body, is because the nervous system and the light you're exposed to is causing these changes, is stimulating certain reactions in your ability to absorb light and what that light does. For example, if blood is losing its shape or arteries are clogging, it's because that blood is in the wrong kind of wavelength of light. The energy that the blood is using is what determines how it can keep its shape and whether it can move and transfer these things properly. This is true for menstrual pain, for childbirth pain. This is true for wound healing, for any kind of blood disease or illness. What matters is the wavelength of light and the ability to circulate. So if the body is stuck in the sympathetic activation, you can't repair and remove all of this waste and remove all of this extra oxygen. As the nervous system becomes stuck and rigid, all of these reactions cause crystallization around the nervous system, which are this like branch of roots in your body, and that downstream effect is causing muscle, bone, and just cellular damage all over. And that's going to manifest as all of these diseases and illnesses and immune problems that people are experiencing. To get out of the sympathetic activation, the way every animal on the planet frees up its nervous system is by shaking. You can watch a dog when they wake up, before they go to sleep, if they get hit or yelled at, or anytime there's a change in what they want to do, they shake off the previous experience so they can reset their nervous system. They can unentangle from the tension that they've been holding on to in that past event, and now can be in a parasympathetic state, rest, repair, and then move on to the next activity. Humans have to do the same thing, or you mess with your ability to circulate blood, to get rid of oxygen, to breathe properly, to open up your diaphragm, as well as allowing for the lymphatic system to move, for the nervous system to remain flexible. In nomadic cultures, when humans were running into less of these health issues, a heavily pregnant woman could be traveling, get off her horse, give birth in a minute, and get back on the horse like it was nothing. Because pain is a distress signal that exists to tell you that something is wrong, that something's not working properly. So if there's pain in these things, it means that there's an improper, somewhere along the lines, an improper chain reaction. And when we're talking about the wavelength of light, your body's producing biophotons. And the wavelength of those biophotons is being input into your molecules that absorb light and generate energy. So things like fear and anxiety and different emotions are producing different wavelengths of light that are generating these actions, just kind of in the same way that you're exposed to blue light. It's the same wavelength of light, so it causes the same kind of negative consequences, which is that the body is doing exactly what it's told to do based off of the wavelength of light it's receiving, because that triggers and stimulates certain responses. And those responses are what it's designed itself around, what it's recorded in its DNA. DNA is an instruction manual. It's a receiver and emitter of these light signals that tells you this is the wavelength of light, and so this is the message we're going to send, and this is the activity we're going to do. DNA doesn't dictate anything, it's just translating what light is dictating. And science is telling you all of these passive things that go on in the body that you can't control, that these chemical reactions and interactions, and there's nothing you can do about them. But you produce the light that causes these things, and you are exposed to the light that also causes these things, that produces the energy, that generates the fractal spheres of energy that you build your body around. You want to know how reptiles can change their color, or why butterflies can create these elaborate patterns? Is because you can customize yourself based off of your will, which is the production of biophotons, arranged around the pigments of your body that absorb that light. And those pigments are attached to other different kinds of molecules that create all of these colors that you see in nature. And you don't have to be in pain and suffering and disease and being eaten alive by these reactive oxygen species because of all the lies and the cult of science that's been created from that. Once you understand how these things work, you know what kind of exercise you need to shake your body loose, to be in the horizon, sunsets and sunrises, to get rid of blue light and all of these artificial lightings. Just like hospitals are the worst places you can go to when you're sick, because that lighting is creating all these reactive oxygen species and making you sicker. And if you're in pain and fear and disease and you feel like you're always dying or always sick, you have to fight back, because that wavelength of light that generates your energy, it matters. And that's how you can reverse those processes, and that's how you can start to heal. And you have to shake. You have to shake it loose. All those tensions and entanglements that keep your body stiff, and you start to crystallize, and it reduces your ability to circulate blood and to breathe out CO2. Those reactive oxygen species are loose in your body. You have to shake them out, and you have to fight back. And you have to remember that the sword is life, and you should take up fencing, get rid of your health insurance. Instead of using money on that, take up the sword and learn how to fight back.